The people who lose everything without a word are usually the ones who had the most to give. The plate slipped from Emily Carter's hands and shattered across the polished floor, the sound cutting through the restaurant like a sudden crack of thunder. Conversations died instantly. Heads turned. The manager's voice followed, sharp and unforgiving, demanding an explanation, demanding someone to blame. Emily didn't look at the broken pieces. She didn't look at the trembling young woman beside her either. Instead, she simply stepped forward, her voice calm, almost too calm for the moment. It was my mistake. A pause, just long enough for the room to decide what it believed. The manager didn't hesitate. Then you're done here. Turn in your apron. No argument. No second chances. Around them, people watched the scene unfold. Some curious, some indifferent, a few quietly uncomfortable, as if they knew something wasn't right but chose silence anyway. If you've ever seen a moment like that, where truth feels heavier than consequences, you already know how rare it is for someone to step forward like she did. Emily untied her apron slowly, folding it with care, as if it still deserved respect even when she no longer did in their eyes. The young woman she had protected stood frozen, lips parted, eyes glossy with guilt, but she said nothing. Not a single word. In the far corner, a man in a dark tailored suit had been watching from the beginning. Daniel Hayes. He hadn't touched his drink, hadn't looked at his phone. His gaze stayed fixed on Emily, studying not what she said, but what she didn't. Most people would have defended themselves. Most would have pointed fingers, raised their voice, fought to stay. She didn't. And that didn't make sense. Emily placed the folded apron on the counter and turned toward the door. Her steps were steady, measured, like someone who had already accepted the outcome long before it happened. Outside, the rain hit hard, soaking the sidewalk in seconds, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that made people run for cover. Emily didn't run. She stepped into it. Within moments, her hair clung to her face, her uniform darkened with water, but she didn't react. She just stood there, still, as if the storm outside was quieter than whatever she carried inside. Behind the glass, Daniel shifted slightly, his reflection faint against the dim lights of the restaurant. Something about that moment stayed with him. The silence, the lack of resistance, the absence of regret. It wasn't weakness. It was a choice. And he could feel it. Slowly, he reached for his phone, not to call, not to text, but to rewind. Because something about Emily Carter didn't add up. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Hayes wasn't sure he understood the person standing right in front of him. Daniel did not leave when the rain started. He stayed by the window, watching the empty sidewalk long after Emily had disappeared into the gray blur of the storm, his reflection faint against the glass, his mind replaying the moment again and again. Something about it refused to settle. People lied all the time. Employees covered mistakes. Co-workers protected each other out of fear. But this was different. There had been no hesitation in her voice, no glance for approval, no silent negotiation in her eyes. She had decided before anyone even asked. That was what bothered him. Slowly, he turned away from the window and signaled for the manager. His tone was calm, but precise. He asked a simple question. Show me the footage from 10 minutes ago. The manager hesitated, confused, but one look at Daniel's expression was enough. Minutes later, they stood in the small back office, the soft hum of security monitors filling the space. The video rolled. Grainy, distant, but clear enough. Daniel leaned slightly closer. The tray. The movement. The moment before the fall. And then he saw it. The subtle shift. The other waitress, her hand unsteady, her balance off by just enough. The plate slipping before Emily even reached for it. And Emily, she had seen it. She had known. The video froze on the exact second their eyes met. No panic. No surprise. Just a quiet understanding passing between them. Then Emily stepped forward. It was my mistake. Daniel exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening, just a fraction. She had not reacted. She had chosen. He replayed it again. And again. Each time, the same conclusion settled deeper. This was not instinct. This was intention. Behind him, the manager shifted awkwardly. Sir, it is not a big deal. Accidents happen all the time. We already handled it. Daniel did not respond immediately. His eyes stayed on the frozen frame, on the girl who had just lost her job without defending herself. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, but sharper. You handled the wrong person. The manager frowned, unsure what that meant, but Daniel had already stepped away. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere had returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked. The world moved on, as it always did. But Daniel Hayes did not sit back down. Instead, he walked to the table where the other waitress still stood, her hands trembling as she wiped an already clean surface. She looked up when he approached, startled by his presence. For a moment, she tried to compose herself, forcing a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Daniel studied her carefully. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. The question seemed simple, but it landed heavier than expected. 2 weeks, she answered softly. He nodded once. "And today would have been your last, right?" Her breath caught. The cloth in her hand stilled. Silence stretched between them, thick and undeniable. She did not answer. She did not need to. Daniel glanced briefly toward the door Emily had walked through, then back at the woman in front of him. "Does she always do that?" he asked. The woman blinked, confused. "Do what?" Daniel's gaze sharpened, but his voice remained calm. "Take the fall, before anyone even asks her to." This time, the woman's composure cracked. Her eyes dropped, her voice barely above a whisper. "She does not like people losing things they cannot get back." Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer, letting the words settle. Then he turned, his mind already moving ahead, connecting pieces that did not quite fit yet. Because people like Emily Carter did not just appear out of nowhere. They were shaped by something, by someone. And whatever had taught her to stand in the storm without flinching was not something he could ignore. Rain always sounded louder when you had nowhere to go. Emily Carter pulled her thin jacket tighter as she walked down the dimly lit street, water dripping from her sleeves, her shoes already soaked through after 2 blocks. The city moved around her like nothing had happened, headlights slicing through the night, people rushing past under umbrellas, each of them heading somewhere that mattered. She did not rush. She never did, because rushing only made you feel like you were losing something. And Emily had learned a long time ago that loss did not care how fast you moved. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She paused under the flickering light of a bus stop and glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. For a moment, she did not open it. Not because she was afraid, but because she had grown used to silence being safer than answers. When she finally unlocked the screen, her eyes softened just slightly. It was from the hospital. A reminder. Tomorrow, 9 in the morning. Payment due. Emily exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cold air, then slipped the phone back into her pocket without replying. She did not need to. She already knew the number. She already knew she did not have it. A few feet away, an older woman struggled to keep her grocery bags from tipping over in the wind. Without thinking, Emily stepped forward, steadying the bags before they could fall. The woman looked up, surprised. "Thank you, dear," she said, her voice warm despite the cold. Emily offered a small nod, her expression gentle but distant, as if kindness was something she gave without expecting to feel anything in return. "You should not be out in this weather," the woman added, studying her more closely now. Emily almost smiled. "Almost. Sometimes you do not get to choose that," she replied quietly. The woman hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but Emily had already stepped back, already moving again, disappearing into the rhythm of the street. She turned the corner and walked another 3 blocks before stopping in front of a small, aging apartment building. The kind of place where the lights buzzed faintly and the paint had started to peel, where rent was just low enough to make staying possible. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of detergent and something older, something worn. Emily climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, until she reached the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small. 1 couch, 1 table, a narrow bed tucked against the wall. Everything in its place. Everything quiet. She set her bag down, then reached into her pocket, pulling out the folded envelope she had been carrying all day. Her final paycheck. Smaller than it should have been. Always smaller than it should have been. For a moment, she just stood there, holding it, her fingers still, her expression unreadable. Then she walked to the table, placed the envelope beside a stack of bills, and sat down. The silence in the room settled around her, heavy but familiar. Emily closed her eyes briefly, not in frustration, not in defeat, but in something quieter. Calculation. She was already thinking about what came next. Not what she had lost, but what she could still give. Across the city, Daniel Hayes stood in his office, staring at the same paused frame on his screen. Emily, standing still, choosing something no one had asked her to choose. He leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against his chin, his mind working through possibilities that did not quite align with logic. People did not sacrifice like that without a reason. Not in his world. Not without something driving them. Slowly, he picked up his phone and made a call. "Find out everything you can about Emily Carter," he said, his voice steady, controlled. A pause. Then, more quietly, almost to himself, "And do it right." Because somewhere between that shattered plate and the rain outside, Daniel had realized something he could not ignore. This was not just a story about a waitress losing her job. This was the beginning of something he did not understand yet. And for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt important. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of gray, overcast morning that made the city feel slower than usual, as if even the buildings needed a moment to wake up. Emily Carter was already up. She had not slept much, but that was nothing new. Sleep, like comfort, was something she had learned to live without when necessary. She stood in her small kitchen, pouring hot water into a chipped mug, watching the steam rise as if it might carry her thoughts somewhere lighter. On the table behind her, the envelope still sat beside the bills, untouched since the night before. She did not avoid it. She simply had not decided yet. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Emily turned slightly, surprised. No one visited her. Not anymore. When she opened the door, the woman from downstairs stood there, holding a small paper bag. The same woman she had helped the night before. "I thought you might need breakfast," the woman said, offering a gentle smile. "It is not much. Just coffee and a bagel." Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, then accepted it with a quiet nod. "You did not have to," she said. "I know," the woman replied. "That is why I did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the woman's gaze softened. "You remind me of someone," she added, almost to herself. Emily did not ask who. She rarely asked questions that opened doors she was not ready to walk through. "Thank you," she said simply. When the door closed again, the apartment felt different. Not warmer, just less empty. Across town, Daniel Hayes sat in his office, a file open in front of him. It was thinner than he expected. Too thin. Employment records. Basic information. No major history. No red flags. Nothing that explained what he had seen. He flipped through the pages again, slower this time, as if something might reveal itself if he looked hard enough. It did not. His assistant stood nearby, waiting. "That is everything we could find overnight," she said carefully. Daniel did not look up. "It is not everything," he replied. His tone was not frustrated. It was certain, because people like Emily Carter did not live quiet lives by accident. Silence like hers was built, layer by layer, decision by decision. "Dig deeper," he added. "School records. Medical. Financial. I want to know what she is protecting." His assistant hesitated. "Protecting?" Daniel finally looked up, his eyes steady. People do not choose loss unless they are protecting something more important than themselves. The words hung in the air, heavier than intended. Meanwhile, Emily sat at her table, unwrapping the bagel slowly, her movements calm, precise. She took a small bite, then reached for the envelope beside her. This time, she opened it, counted the cash once. Then again, her expression did not change. But her fingers paused for just a moment longer than before. Then she reached for her phone and dialed a number she already knew by heart. The line rang twice. "Billing department," a voice answered. Emily closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I am calling about the balance due for tomorrow. I wanted to see if there is any way to extend the deadline." A pause. The sound of typing. The answer came back the way it always did. Polite. Final. "I am sorry, ma'am. The payment is required to proceed." Emily nodded, even though they could not see her. "I understand," she said. And she meant it. She always did. When the call ended, she sat there for a moment, the phone still in her hand, the quiet returning like it never left. Then she placed the phone down, straightened the bills on the table, and began to separate them into small, careful stacks. Rent. Utilities. Hospital. There was not enough. There had never been enough. But Emily did not panic. She did not rush. She simply adjusted. Because somewhere along the way, she had learned that life was not about having enough. It was about deciding what mattered most when you did not. And miles away, Daniel Hayes stared at the empty spaces in her file, realizing that whatever he was looking for was not something that could be found on paper. Sometimes the moment that changes everything does not feel important at first. It feels ordinary. Emily Carter folded the last of the bills into neat stacks, her movements slow, deliberate, as if time itself might stretch if she handled it carefully enough. Rent, utilities, hospital. She stared at the final pile a second longer than the others. Then, without hesitation, she slid most of the cash toward that one. The hospital. Not enough to cover it. Not even close. But it was all she had. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a reminder. It was a call. The same hospital number. Emily picked it up immediately. Hello. Her voice was calm, but something beneath it tightened just slightly. Miss Carter. The voice on the other end said, more urgent than before. We need you to come in today. There has been a change. Emily's fingers curled slightly around the phone. What kind of change? A pause. Too long. It is about your sister. The world did not stop. It did not shake. It simply narrowed. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, then stood up. I will be there in 20 minutes. She did not grab a coat. Did not check the weather. She just moved. Outside. The air was colder than before, the streets still damp from the night's rain, but Emily barely noticed. Her steps were faster now, not rushed, but driven. Focused. Because some things did not wait. Across the city, Daniel Hayes finally received the update he had been waiting for. His assistant entered quietly, placing a new file on his desk. Thicker this time. We found something, she said. Daniel looked up immediately. Go on. She hesitated for just a moment, then spoke. Emily Carter has no significant employment gaps, no criminal record, no financial support from family. But she has consistent hospital payments over the last 3 years. Daniel's expression shifted, just slightly. For what? Her younger sister. Chronic condition. Ongoing treatment. The room fell quiet. Suddenly, the pieces began to move. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Daniel leaned back slowly, his gaze distant now, connecting something deeper than numbers on a page. How much? He asked. His assistant glanced at the file. Approximately $180,000 over 3 years. Out of pocket. Daniel did not respond right away. He did not need to, because he understood what that meant. It meant sacrifice. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. Quietly, consistently, without recognition. His eyes drifted back to the paused image still on his screen. Emily, standing there, choosing loss without hesitation. It was not about pride. It was not about dignity alone. It was survival. Not hers. Someone else's. Meanwhile, Emily pushed through the hospital doors, her breath steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. The bright lights overhead felt too sharp, too clean, too unforgiving. She approached the front desk, her voice controlled. Emily Carter. I received a call. The nurse behind the counter looked up, recognition in her eyes. Yes, they are waiting for you upstairs. No explanation. No reassurance. Just direction. Emily nodded once and turned toward the elevator. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, but she did not slow down. Because she could not. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside, her reflection staring back at her from the polished metal walls. For a moment, just one moment, her composure wavered. Not fear. Not panic. Something quieter. Something deeper. Then the doors closed. And she was gone. And somewhere between a broken plate, a quiet sacrifice, and a hospital call that came too soon, the story was no longer about what Emily had lost. It was about what she was about to risk next. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, but Emily did not move right away. For a brief second, she stood there, as if stepping out meant accepting whatever waited on the other side. Then she walked forward. The hallway was too quiet. Not empty, but quiet in a way that made every footstep feel louder than it should. At the end of the corridor, a doctor stood with a clipboard, his expression professional but careful, like someone choosing his words before speaking them. Emily approached, her voice steady. You said there was a change. The doctor nodded once, then glanced down at the chart before looking back at her. Your sister's condition has progressed faster than we expected. The treatment plan needs to be adjusted immediately. Emily did not interrupt. She just listened. There is an alternative procedure, he continued, but it is not covered under your current plan. A pause. Then the number. It landed between them like something heavy and unavoidable. Emily did not react right away. She had learned not to. Numbers like that did not shock her anymore. They just redirected everything. "How long do I have?" she asked quietly. The doctor hesitated, then answered honestly. "Not long." Emily nodded once. That was enough. No questions. No visible panic. Just acceptance wrapped in something stronger than fear. "Prepare everything," she said. "I will find a way." As she turned toward the room, her steps slowed just slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of what she had just promised. Inside, her younger sister lay still, her breathing soft, her face pale but peaceful. Emily stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair away from her sister's forehead with a gentleness that spoke louder than any words. "Hey," she whispered, her voice softer now. "I am here." Her sister's eyes opened slowly, a faint smile forming. "You always are." Emily smiled back, but only just. Enough to be seen, not enough to break. Outside the room, the doctor exhaled quietly, watching her through the glass. Some people fought with noise. Others fought with silence. Emily Carter did not look like she was losing. Across the city, Daniel Hayes stood by the window of his office, the file still open on his desk behind him. The numbers echoed in his mind. $180,000. 3 years. No support. No complaints. He had seen people spend more than that on a single watch. On a car they did not need. On a deal that did not matter. And yet she had carried it alone. Quietly. Consistently. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Hospital location confirmed. Daniel stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then he picked up his coat. Not because he had to, but because something inside him refused to stay still any longer. Meanwhile, Emily sat beside the hospital bed, her hand resting lightly over her sister's. Her gaze was calm, but her mind was moving faster than it ever had. Options. Possibilities. Sacrifices. Each one measured. Each one weighed. And somewhere in that silence, a thought passed through her mind, simple but heavy. What would you do if the only way to save someone you love meant losing everything you had left? It was the kind of question people liked to imagine from a distance. The kind that made you pause, maybe even reflect for a moment. But Emily was not imagining it. She was living it. And as she sat there, watching the slow rise and fall of her sister's breath, she made a decision. Not out loud. Not dramatically. Just a quiet shift in her eyes. The kind of decision that changes everything long before anyone else even notices. The smallest details are the ones people overlook until they realize those details were never small to begin with. Emily sat beside the bed, her hand still resting lightly over her sister's, her expression calm, but her eyes more distant now, as if she had already stepped into a decision no one else could see yet. The machines hummed softly around them, steady, predictable, almost comforting in their rhythm. But Emily's thoughts were anything but steady. They were precise, calculated, as if she had done this before. After a few minutes, she gently pulled her hand away and stood up. "I will be back," she whispered, though her sister had already drifted back to sleep. Outside the room, the doctor was still there, reviewing charts. He looked up when Emily approached. "I need the full details," she said, her voice composed. "The procedure. The risks. The timeline." The doctor blinked, slightly surprised by the clarity of her request. Most people asked about hope, about chances. Emily asked about specifics. He nodded and began to explain, pointing to figures, outlining steps, describing what needed to happen and how soon. Emily listened without interrupting, her gaze fixed, absorbing every word. When he finished, she asked one more question. "If this is done at another facility, is there a difference?" The doctor hesitated. "There are private centers that can move faster. More advanced equipment." But he paused. "They are significantly more expensive." Emily nodded once. She had expected that. "How much faster?" she asked. The doctor studied her for a moment, then answered carefully. "Days. Maybe weeks." That was all she needed. Emily thanked him quietly and turned away, already reaching for her phone. Her steps were steady again, but something had shifted. Not urgency. Direction. As she walked down the hallway, she dialed a number from memory. Not saved. Not recent. A number she had not called in years. It rang longer than expected. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then a voice answered. Older. Controlled. "Hello." Emily paused for the briefest second, her grip tightening just slightly around the phone. "It is me," she said. Silence on the other end. Heavy. Familiar. "Emily," the voice replied, lower now, almost disbelieving. "I have not heard from you in a long time." Emily did not respond to that. She never did when the past tried to pull her backward. "I need information," she said instead. "About a private medical facility. Fast-track treatment. No delays." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the voice spoke again, more cautious. "That kind of access is not something you ask for lightly." "What happened?" Emily's eyes flicked briefly toward her sister's room down the hall. "Time," she said simply. On the other end, something shifted. Not concern. Recognition. As if the person already understood more than she had said. "There is one place," the voice replied slowly. "But Emily, it comes with conditions." Emily closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. Calm. Certain. "Everything does," she said. A few floors below, the hospital lobby doors slid open, and Daniel Hayes stepped inside, his presence quiet but undeniable. He did not look around like someone unfamiliar. He moved with purpose, his gaze already scanning, already searching. Because by now, this was no longer curiosity. This was something else. Something closer to understanding. And somewhere between a number dialed from memory and a name that had not been spoken in years, the story had begun to reveal something deeper. Something hidden. Because Emily Carter was not just trying to save her sister. She was stepping back into a world she had once walked away from. And whatever she had left behind was now waiting for her to return. The truth does not arrive loudly. It reveals itself in the moments people think no one is paying attention. Emily stood near the end of the hallway, her phone still in her hand, her expression unreadable after the call ended. For a second, she did not move. Then she turned, walking toward the elevator with the same quiet certainty she had carried all day. Inside, her reflection stared back at her again. But this time, something was different. Not fear. Not doubt. Recognition. As if she was no longer trying to avoid who she used to be. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and as Emily stepped out, she slowed. Not because she saw him, but because she felt it. That subtle shift in the air when someone is watching with intention, not curiosity. Daniel Hayes stood across the room, near the reception desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes fixed on her. He had found her faster than expected. Emily did not look surprised. She simply met his gaze, calm, steady, as if this encounter had already been accounted for in whatever plan she was building. Daniel took a few steps forward, closing the distance between them. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice even. "You left before I could ask you something." Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him for a brief moment. "You already found what you were looking for," she replied. It was not a question. Daniel's expression shifted, just enough to reveal that she was not entirely wrong. "Not everything," he said. A pause. Then, more directly, "You took the blame for something that was not yours. That is not normal." Emily's lips curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Neither is watching it happen and doing nothing." The words landed softly, but precisely. Daniel did not deny it. He simply held her gaze, measuring her in a way he was not used to being measured himself. "I came here to understand why," he said. Emily nodded once, as if acknowledging the honesty. Then she glanced briefly toward the elevator behind her. "You are too late for that," she said. "Why?" Daniel asked. This time, there was something sharper beneath the question. Emily looked back at him, her eyes clear, unguarded in a way that felt almost dangerous. "Because I already made the decision," she replied. Daniel frowned slightly. "What decision?" Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. Plain. Minimal. She held it for a second, then handed it to him. Daniel looked down. A name. A facility. Private. Exclusive. The kind of place people did not get into without influence or leverage. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked back up at her. "This is not something you can just walk into," he said. Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "I know." A pause. Then she added, quieter now, "That is why I am going back." Daniel's expression shifted again, this time more noticeably. "Back." Emily exhaled softly, the smallest crack in her composure so far. "Not weakness. Just truth. 3 years ago, I walked away from a contract with them," she said. "I left everything behind." Daniel's grip tightened slightly around the card. "What kind of contract?" Emily held his gaze for a long second. Then she answered, "The kind where you do not get to choose who you become afterward." Silence filled the space between them. The noise of the hospital faded into something distant, irrelevant. Because suddenly, the story was no longer about a waitress who lost her job. It was about a woman who had once had access to something far beyond it and chose to leave. Daniel looked at her differently now, not as someone to understand, but as someone who had been hiding in plain sight. "And now you are going back?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded once. No hesitation, no doubt. "For her," she said. And in that moment, the truth settled in. Emily Carter had never been powerless. She had simply chosen not to use the power she once had. Until now. Some choices do not change your life in a moment. They reveal who you have always been. Emily stood still as the weight of her own words settled between them, the card no longer in her hand, but still holding everything she had just admitted. Daniel Hayes did not speak right away. For the first time since he had met her, he was not analyzing, not calculating. He was listening, really listening. "You walked away from power," he said finally, his voice quieter now. Emily gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod. "I walked away from what it cost," she corrected. There was no bitterness in her tone, just clarity, the kind that only comes from living with a decision long enough that it becomes part of you. Daniel glanced down at the card again, then back at her. "And going back means," he began. Emily finished the sentence for him. "It means I do not get to leave again." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. Somewhere behind them, a nurse called out a name. A phone rang at the front desk. Life continued, but neither of them moved. "You would give that up for her?" Daniel asked, though by now he already knew the answer. Emily's gaze softened just slightly, the only visible change in her expression since he had met her. "It was never mine to keep if she needed it more," she said. And there it was. Not sacrifice, not loss, just a different definition of value. Daniel exhaled slowly, something shifting in him in a way he could not quite name. All his life, he had measured worth in numbers, in outcomes, in things that could be calculated and controlled. But this was something else entirely. Something that could not be bought, not negotiated, not replaced. "There might be another way," he said suddenly, stepping forward just slightly. Emily looked at him, curious but calm. "There usually is," she replied. "But it always costs someone something." Daniel held her gaze, steady. "Then let it cost me." The words hung there, unexpected, even to him. Emily studied him for a long moment, as if weighing not the offer, but the intention behind it. "Why?" she asked softly. Daniel did not hesitate this time. "Because I watched you lose everything yesterday, and you did not even try to stop it," he said. "And I realized something I should have learned a long time ago." A pause. Then, more quietly, "Not everything valuable fights to be seen." The corner of Emily's lips lifted just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. "No," she said. "It does not." She looked down briefly, then back up at him, her eyes clearer now, lighter somehow. "But that does not mean it should be carried alone." Another pause. This time, it was her turn to consider. Not the offer, not the risk, but the possibility that for once she did not have to choose loss as the only answer. Slowly, she reached out and took the card back from his hand. Not to keep it, just to hold it for a second longer. Then she slipped it back into her bag. "I am still going," she said. Daniel nodded. He expected that. "Then I am coming with you," he replied. Not as a command, not as control, just as a decision. Emily looked at him, really looked this time, as if seeing something new. Not power, not status, just a man who had finally chosen to understand instead of assume. And for the first time, she did not refuse. The elevator doors opened behind them with a soft chime. Neither of them rushed, because some journeys are not about speed. They are about direction. And as they stepped forward together, the story that had begun with a broken plate and a quiet lie no longer belonged to loss. It belonged to something far rarer. The moment when someone chooses to stand beside you, not because they have to, but because they finally understand what you were carrying all along. And sometimes, that is the kind of change that does not just alter a life. It redefines what it means to live one.